Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. Our subject of the day is the end of support for SharePoint Server 2016 and 2019. I'm Andreas Khalil, Partner and Program Manager at MP Solution and your moderator for the day. Before I hand you to today's presenters, I would like to mention our rules of engagement. This webinar is recorded and will be available on demand. Please reach out to your partner or direct contact on the team to gain access to it. For questions, please leverage the Q&A feature in your top toolbar. We will dedicate time at the end of this webinar to answer them. Our featured speakers for today are Joseph Kalof, the President of MP Solution, and our Senior Solution Architect, Assad Jimshait. Team, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andreas. I'm going to go ahead and get my presentation ready, and we'll go through this. Let me know when you can see it. All right.
Yep, we can see it.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. The topic is going to be the end of support for both versions of SharePoint on premises, 2016 and 2019, and how to prepare and what our approach is. So let's talk through the two versions a little bit. One thing that was a little bit surprising to me was the change between a legacy versus fixed lifecycle policies that Microsoft has been implementing lately. Traditionally, mainstream support for all products, since I can remember when, has always been 5 years after release, that's mainstream, and then another 5 years after that for what we would call extended support. The same applies to SharePoint 2016. That's the legacy model. 5 years after release of SharePoint 2016, mainstream support ends, which is July 14, 2021. So that ended obviously 4 years ago. But extended support for SharePoint 2016 as part of the legacy lifecycle policy does not end till July 14 of next year, 2026. When it comes to SharePoint 2019, that product now moved into the fixed lifecycle policy, which is, again, 5 years mainstream support post-release. So that is January 9 of 2024. SharePoint 2019 is out of mainstream support as of last year. But the most important thing to remember here and to note is the extended support. The extended support for SharePoint 2019 is no longer part of the legacy lifecycle policy. It's part of the fixed lifecycle policy. And you will notice that the extended support for SharePoint 2019 will end the same day as SharePoint 2016. So that 5-year run for extended support is no longer there. It's now just 2 years after mainstream support ends. Thus, for both products, whether you're on 2016 or 2019, you need to start planning getting off of these two on-premises servers by July of next year. Now, when it comes to legacy versus fixed lifecycle, the implications remain the same. There's no difference. As far as Microsoft is concerned, you are going to stop getting the following, regardless of whether the product is part of legacy or fixed lifecycle. No more security updates as of July of next year. No more bug fixes. No technical support through Microsoft support, and no more online content updates. So you lose all of these. Obviously, specifically, the first one is a very important line item that we definitely encourage our customers to think through hard and fast, because security updates are a thing that you need to be thoughtful of. So I'll go quickly, and I think I might be preaching to the choir here a little bit. I'm probably confident that most of the people attending this webinar and most of the people that might or will listen to it later are going to understand the differences a little bit. But in a nutshell, I will walk through them here. So really, I'm comparing SharePoint on premises 16 and 19, the versions, to SharePoint Online, which is our default recommendation for how to get off of these two servers. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but by default, all things being equal, moving from SharePoint 2016 and or 2019, Ampere Solutions is going to recommend that you go to SharePoint Online. Why? Server management, no more infrastructure. You don't have to worry about that. That overhead and that cost is no longer a thing. You're allowing Microsoft to take care of that for you, right? Feature upgrades. Microsoft has cyclical releases against SharePoint Online that they do for you in the background. They keep you updated on the roadmap when they're going to release. There's actually a feature up in Office 365 that allows you preview access to some of these features if you choose to have preview access. Thus, you don't have, again, to take on the burden of updating SharePoint on premises, updating the applications, potentially if there are updates to the schemas. Remember, you're still relying on SQL Server if you're on premises. So that all goes away, and you allow Microsoft to handle all of that. Access to SharePoint, obviously, no need for VPN. Office 365 lives in the cloud. We'll talk about potentially security a little bit here, but you could still protect it just as well as you used to protect your on-premises server sitting behind a firewall. Entra ID and all of the other identity features within Entra that are offered today allow for a pretty well robust security framework to protect your content in SharePoint. Uptime. Microsoft guarantees you the 5 nines, right? You don't have to worry about that. Microsoft, and actually they have historically with SharePoint, they have always met that number. They've I don't recall them ever failing. There's been some outages, but overall, over the time span of the life of SharePoint Online, the 5 nines have been met as far as service level agreements are concerned. You don't need to worry about that. With on-premises, plenty of variables to have to worry about, right? You got your routers, your VPN, your firewall, your network, your SQL server, your application server, your front end server, a lot of things that you need to worry about, right? So that's why we continuously encourage our customers to go to SharePoint Online. Integrations, I think it's no secret that all of the current innovations within the Microsoft ecosystem are really very well focused in the cloud stratosphere, if you will, right? Everything that Microsoft is working on is cloud first. Power Platform, Teams, OneDrive, you name it, right? Everything is cloud first, and then we'll worry about, or we'll think through how we're going to fit that into our on-premises products. So if you want the cutting edge, if you want to be, at the forefront of all these innovations, SharePoint Online is definitely the way to go, right? Compliance and governance, it's all built in. There's a very, very mature compliance and governance framework built around SharePoint Online. SharePoint on premises, you have to do that manually. You have to go and work on that on your own, right? And then scalability. So we get asked that question a lot. Scalability, as far as performance is concerned, Microsoft is committed to ensuring that you're scaling up. They're scaling their platform up as they see that increased demand. I mentioned here, right? There are tens of thousands of customers on that platforms with millions of users at any given time. So Microsoft is always thoughtful and monitoring and thinking through how to ensure that platform is always performing at peak. So you don't have to worry about load balancing like on-premises servers. You don't have to have 6 front ends and 2 SQL servers on the back and worry about all of that. So this is one thing you could obviously, you know, take off of your task list between on-premises and online. So is there still a place for SharePoint on-premises? The answer is yes. This is not, while we push SharePoint online and we want all customers to be up in Office 365, there is still scenarios where you cannot be up there, uh, with reckless abandon. You still need an on-premises servers. Uh, if you are running SharePoint 2016 or SharePoint 2019, come July of next year, you need to upgrade to SharePoint Server Subscription Edition. That is the next supported version of SharePoint on premises. And why do you need to, and why? So I'm given here a few scenarios of why a customer and where we've run into situations where we could not just get our customers completely off of on-premises infrastructure, on-premises products, and move them over to Office 365 SharePoint Online. One, custom WSP applications. So what that really means is that customers that have invested in custom applications that use managed code, they've developed them, C# code that's compiled and that runs against the SharePoint server. Remember, you cannot compile and run code against SharePoint Online. That's just not a thing. So is there a path to have that same functionality move over to SharePoint Online? Yes, but sometimes considering the fact that you've invested, as a customer could have invested a lot of time, money, and effort into building that application, it might not be worth the refactoring of that application using the Power Platform and or Azure services. So you cannot refactor it with the Power Platform. It's managed code that you've invested in, and you don't have the budget. Then our recommendation would be, and that's a business critical application that you run, then obviously you would need to move or you would need to upgrade to SharePoint Server Subscription Edition in that case. The other time where we've seen customers not being able, and that's actually the second one, the data sovereignty one, is actually a smaller piece of what we run into. But believe it or not, we have run into data sovereignty issues with Office 365. Not in the fact that your data isn't safe up there. It's very safe up there. But we've had some international customers in some situations where the data cannot live in a vendor hosted environment. It has to be owned by the provider themselves. Thus, you understand, you move to SharePoint Online, Microsoft is hosting your data. It is on their infrastructure. It is on their assets, right? In situations where you are required to be the only owner of the data, obviously you cannot move to online, and you will need to continue to house that data on your own infrastructure. Thus, you will need SharePoint Server Subscription Edition. The other one that we've run into is the multi-geo applicability. So Office 365 does offer a multi-geo component. The GDPR Europe, where data residency is required to be in Europe, is something that we do all the time. If you stand up a customer in Office 365 and SharePoint Online, where they have, let's suggest, a United States component to their business and a European component to their business, Microsoft offers the option to go multi-geo, and thus data that should be owned by the European subsidiary of the company will actually reside in Europe. Microsoft will actually physically have that data residing in Amsterdam or Germany or wherever they have data centers there. Where that becomes complex is there are certain countries that want the data housed in that country, right? GDPR is European, so it covers the continent. There are certain countries in East that require the data to be housed in that country. And if Microsoft does not have a data center in that country, then you are not compliant to data sovereignty, right? So the example I would give is if let's suggest Spain comes out with a law that says the data has to reside in Spain, right? And Microsoft does not have a data center in Spain, then you can't house it in Amsterdam, right? So this is where you run into some complexity. Those situations are few and far in between, and there are very few countries that actually enforce that or require that, but we have run into them before. And finally, third-party integrations. So third-party integrations are a thing in Office 365. They are definitely mature, but we've also run into situations where a customer has on-premises legacy applications and legacy third-party products that they've sort of integrated them in a hodgepodge way because of how old they are with SharePoint on premises, and doing that and reinventing all of these integrations in SharePoint Online is way too costly and not supported. And thus, obviously, we're going to recommend that the customer upgrades to the subscription edition of SharePoint Server. The last one is authentication. That's the one thing that we actually had one customer we ran into. What is authentication? I'll talk quickly through that. This is very specific to a lot of customers. We have run into a few customers, of which one of them we're actually in the process of migrating or upgrading, and they use the old forms-based authentication in SharePoint, meaning it's not an Active Directory account to log on. The user identity is stored in SQL Server, so users can go and create their own profile on SharePoint Server. That is not a thing in SharePoint Online. Forms-based authentication does not exist anymore up there. To authenticate against SharePoint Online, you must have a user in Entra ID. It's as simple as that. Whether you're a corporate user or a guest user is irrelevant. It supports both. You must have a user in Entra ID. And unfortunately, if you have an application that you've built that leverages forms-based authentication, you cannot go to SharePoint Online with that application. So what is the migration path, right? And here I'm going to talk about the migration path. I'm not going to focus on subscription edition. I'm gonna focus on what is the migration path over to SharePoint Online if you are still running some sort of on-premises infrastructure 2016 or 2019. So obviously the first and most important thing is to assess the customizations of your on-premises server, to identify and understand whether the whole application can get up and move over to SharePoint Online, or if there is a necessity to remain in on-premises or live in a hybrid world, right? So you have to assess the customizations that you've built in your SharePoint on-premises world. The next thing is identify the content and the data. And the reason I say this is because obviously with SharePoint on-premises, your storage was yours. You could increase your storage as you see fit. You have to be a little bit careful about that when you go to SharePoint Online. Microsoft obviously will allow you unlimited storage, but not for free. So they're going to cap you. SharePoint is, baseline 1 terabyte of storage. When you get to SharePoint Online, you get a little more storage based on your license also here and there. But in general, it's about 1 terabyte of storage baseline. So you have terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of storage in SharePoint on premises. You have to be thoughtful about the cost of getting it up there because you're going to have to pay for additional premium storage. So the next piece is visibility, right? If you identify the fact that you have customizations that need to be refactored, how do they get refactored? And what is the cost to them getting refactored, right? We talked earlier about if you have a WSP with custom C# managed code, that's not going to run up there. So what do we do with it? How do we refactor it, right? And I'm going to actually hand it over a little bit to Assad to talk for about 30 seconds about some of the engagements that he's been on where customers had to think through the refactoring exercise.
Yeah, so besides like the custom applications that have been built on the environment, you also have to look at SharePoint workflows, which you may have to convert into Power Automate. Maybe you have third-party workflows like Nintex running, so you have to kind of evaluate those as well, what effort that's going to take for that as well. If they're running classic sites on their on-premises server, then converting that to modern, you'd have to kind of evaluate that and see exactly what the labor is going to take on that side there. Some parts of classic to modern, consider some conversion tools for those, but you have to kind of like assess that, how long it would take to, especially with the pages getting converted. And I would probably also say any types of third-party solutions, there may be the same company may have another third-party solution for SharePoint in the cloud. So kind of like, kind of judging what do you have to personally refactor, what could you purchase as a third-party component, but then you have to also assess converting from one version to the other, because even third-party, tools also have a conversion layer that you may have to go through.
Thank you, Assad. So the next piece is the approach. We get asked that question all the time, and in all fairness, there is no single approach that we employ. The approach is dependent on the size and the customer and their capability and appetite for disruption. We could lift and shift, but you can't lift and shift all the time. That might not be possible based on customer size or based on how they're migrating. There's a phased approach where you could cut over time. That's something that we usually would do for an extremely large customer. You can't just grab and move all their data all over a single cut over period. And then sometimes, depending on the customer, you could do a little bit of both, right? You could lift and shift some sites, but have a phased approach depending on what else they have in other sites. So there's no one size fits all, one model fits all. It has to be very specific and very bespoke to the customer and what their environment looks like. The next piece is pick the tool. Pick the tool could potentially be moved to the first phase, right? But I left it out here because sometimes we use the SharePoint migration tool, which is a free tool. But in all fairness, picking the third-party tool, I'm not going to name any here. We're not in the business of really advertising tools, but we will talk to our customers about the pros and cons of the third-party tools. There's a lot of great tools on the marketplace. Been around for a very long time, very mature, very robust. But again, pricing has to do with it, and some other variables come into play when it comes to picking the tool to do the migration. Finally, test, analyze migration performance. Remember, if you're going to the cloud, there's two things, right? Testing is when we talk about testing I'm trying to talk about two things here. I'm talking about testing the migration, what does it look like, analyzing the performance of that migration, but then going back to what Assad mentioned earlier, and I'll let him speak up here a little bit. Testing also is important if you have that refactoring piece that we're looking at. When you're rebuilding applications, you have to test them before you actually let them out in production for users to use them, or when you cut over. And SharePoint doesn't give you a very good test dev sort of production environment model, right? Not like your hardcore development. And you have to be careful about how to do that when you're refactoring your applications. And Assad, I'm going to let you speak to this, as you've done quite a bit of these in the past, a little bit, when it comes to apps.
Yeah, so the good part about a migration is generally no one's really using the destination site that you're migrating to. So a lot of times you can kind of do some of the UAT testing from that location. And then you just have to make sure that you actually, clean out all the data before you actually do the content migration. So, but generally, we always create the applications. We always have a UAT session to make sure everything looks good, because even though it may be the exact same form, sometimes it's, slightly different. And especially with large customers, that they're going to really potentially get a lot more questions on their help desk. So you really want to have a good UAT session and change management control on these type of areas here.
And Assad, when it comes to a user training, I know that there is a component to that. We're not a training partner, obviously, but there's a component to for example, when you go from traditional legacy workflows over to Power Platform, what is our approach when it comes to getting customers from end users familiar and ready for those?
So generally, we do create some documentation. We have like train the trainer type of methodology. We also have, power user training, end user training, which, is going to primarily be what the end customer will actually see, not the power users. And then, of course, we usually have brown bag sessions with anyone who wants to join for those particular applications that we've created.
Very cool. Thank you. And then last but not least, obviously, as a partner, we always are available. We always ensure that the duration of the migration has a help desk component, because sometimes users are, well, not sometimes, all the time, users are going to come back with questions, maybe missing data, maybe a little bit of help. So always have a plan to have a remediation playbook, and also a help desk component where you stay post-migration for at least a few weeks, if not longer, depending on the size of the customer, to support them, and let the dust settle post-migration. And with that being said, I will hand it back over to Andreas. You're on mute, I think, Andreas.
Sorry for that. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'm going to open the floor for Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature in your top toolbar. The first question we have, what are the best practices for training employees on the new SharePoint Online environment?
Sat, I think I'm going to let you take that, since you are more of a trainer than I am.
So one part about the training is to create the documentation. A lot of times what I inform folks to do is to really look at the help file that's in SharePoint. It really has a lot of how-to steps that you can particularly reutilize in your documentation, either as links pointing to it or as reference points. You just, make sure you say that this is called, comes from the Microsoft help file. A lot of the other training is usually based off of, their new navigational structures, how to access content that may be in different locations. And usually a lot of training is going to be like things that may have broken, like what the owners of the documents have to do. Like, for example, when you migrate, any embedded links or shared, anything that's links and that were shared, those links are going to be bad now. So you'll have to kind of evaluate all of those areas in which the owners of the documents and the site owners would have to actually manually update after the migration.
The second question, can I live in both worlds, both on-prem and online?
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our customers are in hybrid model. Larger customers, some of our larger customers cannot really go online based on one of the slides I showed, which is they have custom applications. You could still have that custom application run on premises and do its thing, while you also have other departments within your organization running online. And you could actually create a hybrid search so that you're not confusing your users, so that when they go search for something or try to pull up something within SharePoint, leverage it as document management, it returns and feels like one single platform.
All right, and we have a third question, and that's a long one. We have SharePoint on-premise and only people with a VPN can access. If we migrate to SharePoint Online, how can I secure the logins? We're worried that someone may get our username and password or hack from some location, as they can at least tip the server to brute force it.
Yeah, so I think that's a huge concern that comes up often, but in reality, that's probably a better conversation for one of our security webinars. There is Microsoft 365 and Azure provide very, very robust and mature security platform that ensures that even though that data of yours is living on an internet facing platform, accessing it is almost impossible, and hacking it is almost impossible if you do the right thing from a security perspective by leveraging Entra ID, Defender, Intune, and all of the other artifacts that come with that Microsoft provides. You barely ever have to worry about that. It actually could be argued that there's a better chance for your server behind the firewall get accessed because a lot of systems administrators get comfortable with the fact that there's a firewall sitting there and sometimes blink versus securing your Microsoft 365 infrastructure.
Awesome. I'm sharing my screen right now on the upcoming webinars that we have, which is the series of Agentic AI. So we'll have 3 webinars, one in October, one in November, and one in December. You can access the registration link from the screen right now or from our future emails. And that's everything. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.